Okay, everybody, welcome to yet another Nova Scribes. We're pleased to welcome Doug Hensch, who is an executive coach, author, and speaker who helps leaders grow through humility, curiosity, and connection. He's also the author of, count 'em, three books: Positively Resilient, Rethinking Humility, and Rethinking Curiosity. His fourth book is scheduled to launch in 2026 and will be sort of a daily devotional for leaders. Doug is based out of Leesburg, Virginia, and he is a diehard Buffalo Bills and Boston Red Sox fan. Go Bills! And Doug, what have you brought for us tonight?
Go Bills. I bring my humility, being a Bills and a Red Sox fan with 56 years of lots of losses and heartbreak. So, once again, thank you, Brian and Casey and the whole team for having me, and for all of you who are taking your time out of your schedule. My hope is that this is not just theoretical for you, that this is practical, that you can walk away with a tip or two to do something differently in your work. And even I personally think intent-based leadership has some applications in our personal lives. So I'm excited about that. And one of the things I want to mention before we get started is please interrupt, raise your hand. I'm going to count on Brian and Casey actually to let me know if you put anything in the chat, or if you do want to just come on board. I'm happy to put the slide away and focus on your question. While I do have slides, what your questions and your comments are more important to me, uh, but not as important as Brian's AI. So we have to make sure we're good with that. With that said, let me actually find my slides and start getting us ready to go. All right, Brian, give me a thumbs up if you're seeing the slide. Okay, so we're going to start off actually with just a little bit of a interaction here. If you guys remember last time we used Mentimeter, introduced to me by Brian himself. So what I'd love you to do is just, what are the words that come to mind when you think of great leadership? All we're going to ask you to do is go to menti.com, use the code that's up on the screen, or take a picture, or excuse me, point your camera at the QR code, and would just love to hear what you're thinking when it comes to great leadership. Feel free to just write Brian or Casey. Thoughtful. Love it. Inspires action. Yeah, good. Inspires action thoughtfully, maybe. And if you're having trouble with this, just point your camera from your phone. There we go. It's starting to work. I'm assuming that's collaborate, communication, follower. Okay.
Oh,
Good.
yeah.
Mentor, all good words. Good. Well, thank you. Thank you for breaking the ice. I think these words all do apply to the conversation we're going to be having today. Clarity of vision, absolutely. Good. In fact, that's one of the main tenets of intent-based leadership, which, by the way, I'll probably be referring to as IBL at times. So please be aware of that. Now, I started asking myself these questions when I was young. My dad is an avid reader, and actually made it to be the vice president of engineering for his company as a water purification public utility. And he was always reading management books, going to management seminars. So I would pick them up and look at his highlights and everything. And then, of course, I start reading these books. So I've been thinking about these words for 40 plus years. And when it was much earlier in my career, I remember distinctly I was in college and I asked my dad what he actually thought good leadership looked like. And he said something that will resonate with me for the rest of my life, which is, tell him what needs to get done, but just don't tell him how to do it. And, I thought, then I think I moved on to bigger and better things and reading more and more books, got different degrees, started coaching leaders, designing leadership development programs. And something that I came to realize that I had been getting wrong for a very long time was that as I'm developing leadership programs and running stand-up programs, which I still think are good and have a place, one thing I realized about intent-based leadership is it wasn't a leadership development program, it's culture change. And I'll even go as far to say, and I think Casey and there's another young man on our call who I'll introduce in a second will might back me up on this, but my thinking is that intent-based leadership is like the greatest thing since sliced bread. My enthusiasm could not be higher at this point. So, what I what I want to do, give you a quick look at what we're going to be talking about. I'm going to tell you the story of the Santa Fe. If you've read the book or watched any of David Marquet's videos online, you may have heard it, but we'll go through that briefly. We won't spend a lot of time, but it's a good basis for how we got here. Give you a high-level overview of intent-based leadership. Go over a couple of assumptions about leadership and some research in the field of psychology that I think are very relevant. And then we'll focus the majority of our time talking about tools for each one of the basic three elements or the three C's: control, competence, and clarity of intent-based leadership. Before we get started, I would love to introduce somebody, a guy named Chuck Dunphy. Chuck was actually on the Santa Fe. And Chuck, if you wouldn't mind just saying hello, and then my ask of you is to keep me honest today if I'm wrong or screwing anything up.
Yeah, thanks, Doug. Again, I'm Chuck Dunphy. Yep, I had the lot of fun and privilege to be on the Santa Fe right around the time of the book. David got there a few months ahead of me, but then I got there and got a chance to um, do a lot of different um, stuff on the boat. So um, I just want to. I've met Doug, and he's a great guy. And yeah, I'll keep you honest, Doug.
Awesome. Thank you, Chuck. So I don't know how often we have celebrities on, but I guess we count Chuck as a celebrity in this particular case. Is that all right, Chuck? We're
I would never say that, but
All right. Well, anyway, thank you for joining us. Great to have you here and to have that first person, experience. So honestly, don't hesitate to jump in at any time, Chuck. So let's get started. So let's start off with the story first. David Marquet was a United States naval officer, and at one point got the command of the Olympia, who, by the way, Chuck, Casey Creech, who you might see in your view, has a good friend that was actually on the Olympia, and I guess David was supposed to be his captain, and for what we'll explain in a second, wasn't. So for those of you that don't know the story, David was assigned to the Olympia and spent about a year in a cohort studying to be a naval commander. And part of that training is getting to know your ship. Well, about a short time before he was about to take command of the Olympia, uh, the captain of another sub, the Santa Fe, decided it was time to move on. And I believe David's admiral said, I think you'd be a good person for the Santa Fe. And I think that's when David might have started to sweat and have heart palpitations because for the past year, his cohort, these other budding commanders, had talked about the Santa Fe, which was the worst performing sub. Was it in the entire Navy or just the Pacific, or are we saying the whole Navy, Chuck?
uh, I just say this Pacific because that's what I know for sure. I don't know how
Okay.
it compared to all the Atlantic boats.
Okay. So so not only was it performing underperforming by a long margin, but morale on the ship was terrible. I believe I might be getting the numbers wrong. It's not super important, but I think out of 30 that were up for reenlistment, I think only three decided to reenlist. So it was not a great place to be. And it was a different ship. So David gets on board, takes command, and I believe is taking it out, getting ready for the big inspection. And at this point, starts, thinking, hey, I'm going to go back to my leadership days at the Naval Academy, and I'm going to pull open my leadership book. And if you see the text on the screen, it basically tells us the leader needs to know a lot and needs to tell people, not only when to jump, but how high and with how many feet and how many steps to take and every other little command. So it had a very much a command and control, and that's was David's training. Shortly into his tenure, they took the sub out and he gave a fateful command. I believe he said they were in the middle of a drill and he wanted to amp things up a little bit. So he wanted to put some pressure on the crew, right? See how they'd respond. And he said, all ahead 2/3. And that command was relayed to the driver of the ship, who I think was all of 19 years old. And as David tells the story, nothing happened. So he looks around the periscope, taps the driver on the shoulder and says, "Hey, what's going on here? I thought we were, we're gonna. You heard the command. All ahead 2/3." And he says, "Captain, there's no 2/3 setting on this sub." So David, being probably a little bit embarrassed, says, "Good job" to the driver. Goes back to the officer that relayed his command and said, "Did you know about this 2/3 thing?" And he said, "Yes, I did." So my question to all of you is, and you don't have to answer, but it's, why do you think that officer relayed that command of all ahead 2/3? And well, the answer was because he was told to do it, right? This is how they were trained. You obey orders. And it was at this point that David realized that not knowing, well, I guess it wasn't just a one-time thing. There were a number of incidents and times where he realized that he did not know nearly as much as his crew, and that the old way of leading, of being the expert who knew every single thing, was not going to work. So he gathers his officers together on a number of conversations, and one of the times they talked about the idea of pushing authority to where the decisions were being made, and they had a number of conversations. I'll skip to the end. I think within 2 years, correct me if I'm wrong, Chuck, but it was the highest performing sub in the Navy. In fact, I think may have had the highest rating. 1 year. Wow. Okay. Good correction. In 1 year, it was the highest performing submarine in the entire United States Navy. Okay. Not just the Pacific. Forget those Atlantic guys. And I believe 100% of those who were up for reenlistment also decided to stick around. Not a bad record. Now, this didn't happen overnight. This was over the course of a couple of years, but the transformation was pretty quick. There are some really simple, practical, research-based ideas that went into the way that they talked to each other and the way that these officers led. So, as I mentioned, I'll probably be referring to it as IBL. And, I wish I had the 9-minute video. I wish I had sent that to you. So, Chuck, if you have that, you can put it in the chat. If not, don't worry about it. Or Casey's going to find it. Here's a screenshot from the video. But my story of getting connected with IBL was I was facilitating a class at a client in Northern Virginia, and someone came up to me at a break and put their phone in my face and said, "Have you ever heard of this guy?" And it was the 9-minute video that hopefully you all get a chance to watch at some point. And I ordered the book. I sequestered myself for the weekend. I read the entire book, and I was just absolutely mesmerized by this approach, and I thought it was fantastic. So I'm excited to share it with you, whether you are in a formal leadership position or not. There are tips, tricks, and hints I think that you can implement, again, even with your family, I believe. So a couple of assumptions to help us kind of lay the groundwork so that we're all on the same page talking about this. The first is leaders are less likely to know everything compared to just 2 decades, 3 decades, and of course, 40, 50 years ago. We know from the research that the knowledge in many of the fields that we work in is turning over at a faster rate. So being able to learn is really the new skill, I think, for leaders, for them to stay up on things. It is not to be an expert. Now, it doesn't mean don't be educated, don't learn, don't try to understand your team and some of the specifics they're doing, but it does take some of the pressure off to be the go-to person, right? And in fact, Captain Marquet likes to say, when you are the go-to person, you don't get to eat dinner, right? Because everybody's asking you questions and you are the go-to. And then, of course, you become a funnel and kind of hold things up as well. So, the dominant management theory, right, is still rooted in the leader is the one who makes the decisions, tells people what to do. And one of the things that intent-based leadership really tries to hammer home is replace the leader-follower mindset with leader-leader. And, let's see if I can do it. If I were able to put a star next to something in our conversation, this would be one of them. Because I do believe the mindset of bringing in that humility and that curiosity to these conversations is absolutely critical. And if you don't do that, you're going to fall back. You're going to fall back into telling people what to do. And one psychological theory that I do want to bring up because I do think it matches so well. It's not perfect and it's not one for one, but something called self-determination theory. If you'd like to read more about it, check out Why We Do What We Do by Edward Deci and Edward Deci and his team over a number of years. And I believe the theory has been around for, I think, over 50 years and is one of the few psychological theories that has withstood the test of time. And it's pretty simple. Three elements are needed for people to feel motivated, engaged, and a sense of well-being. Autonomy, right? Having some control over their own behaviors, their goals, the way they go about things. Competence, right? Being able to master tasks, get good at things, right? Develop those relevant skills. And then, get that sense of effectiveness, right? To have some type of measuring stick to say, how am I doing, right? Am I getting better? That's good. And then relatedness, this need to feel a sense of belonging and attachment to others and, experience meaningful connections. And I would also throw in some sense of purpose. That sense of purpose is probably a little bit more connected to the concept of intent-based leadership. There's not a whole lot on relatedness. My personal belief is that if you implement this level or this type of culture change in intent-based leadership, I do believe you can create much better teamwork and connection among the people in your group. Let me pause for 5, 10 seconds and just see if anybody's got any quick questions, and then we're going to do another quick Menti.
So you can feel free to go off mute, type something into chat. What's coming up for you? Questions, comments, insights, highlights, queries? What's coming up?
All right. Casey, go for it.
Hey, someone came up and put that phone in your face, says, do you know who this is? At some point, something clicked in and you went, this makes sense. I'm curious, would you mind sharing that moment or when you realized this was the best thing since sliced bread?
Yeah, and I think it's also evolved over time, Casey. I think there's a part in the video where he says, it was at that point that I vowed to never give another order. Now, in all honesty, he did give some orders, and we don't necessarily say never give an order again, but it was this idea that the commander of a nuclear submarine, am I allowed to say with nuclear weapons, Chuck? Is that declassified? No, we don't. Okay, it had
Was
some
that
type of weapons.
true? So
Okay, all right. So what we do know
it's
there
not
was a
that you couldn't, but it's not true.
okay, fair enough. So there were
Wrong class. So, yeah.
there was a nuclear reactor that moved the submarine. But what got me, Casey, was, I'm coaching all these people who are just unwilling to give control and unwilling to delegate. And then I had a great answer for them. I said, well, if a submarine commander in a culture that's several hundred years old of command and control can do it, so can you, right? So that's what it was for me. I think it's a really good question. Does that make sense?
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. And yes, I want to follow up. It looks like Tamara had her hand raised as well.
Oh,
I did have my hand raised and then I chucked it down. I'm talking myself into circles. I'm really intrigued by the leader Fowler and leader. And there's some leadership principles about, there's obviously the leader like Marquet, but then there's the leader of who is the first person to follow them. and how that inspires others to follow them and become leaders on their own, and take the first steps. So I'm trying to apply that principle to what you're saying, and I haven't come up with anything yet, but I'm not sure there is an answer specifically without a scenario to apply to it.
Well, clarify your question if you don't mind for me, because maybe I can take a stab.
There are some trains of thought with leadership that you have the leader who provides direction, and then the first person who finds themselves empowered steps forward to demonstrate that they have the power to make decisions and they have the authority to do something. And then others follow them. So is that like leader, follower, develop, then progresses to leader, leader, leader? Like, can other leaders inspire more leadership and empowerment from followers?
I think the answer to your last question is yes. And what I would say, what we mean by leader, leader is that it's looking at everyone as being a leader. And it's also, and I'm going to go on a little bit of a tangent here, that the goal of leadership is not necessarily number one achievement, but it's continuing to build leadership in the organization. So that because, and I can tell you from one of my personal conversations with David Marquet was that, he was really thinking hard about his legacy too, because they're quite often, and this isn't just in the Navy. I mean, I think we see this in everywhere, is that I think there's almost a certain amount of delight that when a leader leaves, that the organization doesn't do as well, right? And because it was focused, it was so personality driven. It was that human being really did such a great job. And I think what David and I think it's important to give a lot of credit to his officers as well, because they were a part of all these conversations, is that how do you build the culture where people step up automatically? So maybe there is the leader, 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 leader all the way down the line. But that's an interesting concept. Thank you for asking. Chuck, what did I miss?
Well, I was just going to say my example for that question, and just to kind of explain the leader leader model is, on a submarine, you have technicians that know every piece of the ship. Well, you may have a very junior sailor. The kid went from boot camp to A school, which is like the school you learn your trade. And you may then go to a very specific school to learn about a very specific piece of gear. And you come to that submarine and you're the absolute expert on that piece of gear, but you're still a very junior sailor. We wanted to make sure that you, as even that junior sailor, would speak up when you knew something was either wrong, or my gear wasn't working right, or the ship was going to do something that was going to affect that piece of gear. We needed to hear from you, but there are lots of ships where that young sailor would be very nervous and he would just sit back and not say anything. Um, but on our ship, on our boat, we really tried to um, we made the effort, and I think we were successful at making sure that even that sailor, when he found out, hey, we're going to get underway in a month, which on a lot of ships, those sailors might not even know that. They might not learn until a few days before. But on ours, we tried to let everybody know as soon as possible. He knew his gear. He was going to do preventive maintenance on his gear. It was on his schedule, but they can't do it when you're underway. But he might say, you know what, my gear is working perfectly. Everything's within spec. I want to wait till after the underway to fix the gear because, well, especially Navy people, like you don't, if you take something apart and put it back together again, your worst fear is that it's not going to work. And it's going to take more and more effort. Or he might say, you know what, it's been running rough, but instead of waiting another month to do the maintenance, I'm going to do it today. And I'm going to start today so that I have an entire month to get my gear working. Probably nobody else on the submarine would have ever known that that was an issue or would have been an issue. I mean, it would have come up on somebody's schedule at some point, but he knew about it first. I guess that's a clear story for me as to what
Mhm.
leader means.
Yeah, that's a really good ad. Thank you, Chuck. And just a real concrete example. Thank you. So I'm going to do another quick Menti here, just to gauge what you're thinking. And again, if you've joined us a little bit late, take a picture of, or excuse me, open your camera and take a look at, point it at the QR code, or just go to menti.com and use the code at the top of the screen. And I'm going to wait a little couple minutes. Actually, you know what? I'm just going to start showing them right now. Why not? There we go. So how do we rank these? By the way, I probably should have clarified, rank them in order of importance for well-being, engagement, motivation. And if that changes your answer, I apologize. Good thing I'm not charging for this. All right. A couple more people just throwing some answers in there. And we basically do have what Edward Deci has talked about in his research is that actually autonomy really is the linchpin. And I think, Casey, that also goes back to your question earlier that if it really is the biggest driver of well-being, engagement, and motivation, then that's another reason why intent-based leadership is so attractive to me. Now, of course, these other two really are super important, and we can't have full motivation and engagement without them. It's just that autonomy is the linchpin or the foundation of all. So let's do a super quick overview and talk about the tools because I want to make sure everyone gets to making Christmas cookies and whatever else is going on. All right, so control, right? And this is the idea of giving control or pushing authority to information so that people do, as Chuck said, they're not only acting like leaders, but they're thinking like leaders. They have the ability to make decisions, solve problems, and implement strategy and so forth. Competence speaks to the idea of making sure that people know what they're doing, that they have the skills, right? Super important. And then last, clarity. Understand that the organization's mission, purpose, priorities even. And I love this graphic because we'll talk about it in a little bit. That the idea is that you tune control to competence and clarity. We don't just let anybody do anything they want, which is usually the biggest fear I think of people when they're talking about delegation. I think the research is pretty clear on that. Trust when leaders talk about not trusting their team to do the right thing or to do it well, it's because they believe, and they're sometimes wrong about this, that their teams aren't necessarily competent. Okay. And so we've got to make sure our leaders are comfortable with that. And of course, that leaders are also expressing clarity. So let's talk a little bit about control, right? What are the ways, and I'd love to see this in the chat or go off mute. Feel free to raise your hand or just go off mute. What are the ways that we could give control so that people can feel a little bit more sense of autonomy? We can push more authority to where the information is. Delegating, cool. Yep. Thank you, Brian. That's the easy one. Being clear on what needs doing. Good. Thanks, Casey. Yep. Just trusting people. Thank you, Rachel. Welcome back, by the way, Rachel. Amanda, decision making on how to do things. Okay, so helping people with decisions, asking questions instead of thanks, Donald. Yep. And just listening. Yep. Listening's never a bad thing, I don't think. Right. Giving room to try and fail. Realize the frameworks gradually. What do you mean by that, Wayne? So instead of, so helping people along the journey, it sounds like, right? Spending time to understand what they really want or need. Good. All good stuff. All right. So, yeah, so it's not just delegating, and I know Brian wasn't saying that was the only way. Um, but one of the things we want to talk about is giving up control, which really has a more of a meaning of giving it up completely, Where in intent-based leadership, we talk about giving control, which is not doing it blindly. Okay. And the mechanism, and by the way, we're going to talk about one or two practical tips for each of the three C's: control, competence, and clarity. The one that I think is really at the heart of intent-based leadership is this ladder of leadership. And I'm going to walk people through this, or walk people up the ladder. I'm trying to see how many times I can get Casey to laugh. So, um, first up, when you've got somebody brand new, maybe with low confidence, don't necessarily know what they're doing just yet, they're going to say, these are things that we will hear as leaders. Tell me what to do. Now, by the way, sometimes it's masked, right? It's camouflaged. We don't always hear exactly, hey, tell me what to do, but they're putting information out there, and you can tell that they're probing because they want you to make a decision for them, solve a problem, or move something out of the way. Now, as leaders, the way the ladder of leadership works is we try to walk them up one step at a time. So if somebody does come to you and says, hey, tell me what to do, as leaders, we say, what are you seeing? Right? Tell me what's going on in the environment. And actually, let me step out of this for a second. This is when I learned about the ladder of leadership, my first thoughts were that this is a coaching based approach to leadership, because the ladder really gets you to be curious and walk people up at a good pace. And I'll talk about pace again in a moment. So someone comes and says, tell me what to do. One of the first questions we ask is, what are you seeing? After we probe a little bit more, get some more information from them to feel like we've got a clear picture and that they're seeing everything that they should be seeing, we might say, okay, so based on what you're seeing in this team, what do you think? Right? What might be your hypothesis about what's going on? We walk them up one more step. What would you like to do about it? And what we're trying to do is get them closer to the fifth step, which is I intend to, and as you can see with the target there, that the goal is that we have people coming to us with their intentions, which is again why we call it intent-based leadership. Now, talking about pace, someone comes to you and says, Doug comes to Casey, Casey's my manager, and I say, hey, Casey, tell me what to do. And Casey says, well, what are your intentions? He's setting me up for failure, right? He's got to help me walk up the ladder step by step.
Mm-hmm.
And and steps 1 through 4 are all still actually reminiscent of the leader follower model, right? I'm deferring to my manager, Casey, when in fact, what we're really trying to do is share our intentions. And this is where I might say, even if I come to Casey and say, I intend to cancel the weekly staff meeting,
Mm-hmm.
Casey still has the opportunity to ask me questions. What are you thinking about this? What made you make this decision? What do you think the ramifications are? What could go wrong, right? Now, there's 2 more steps on the ladder. I've done and I've been doing, which I think can be in some cases categorized as asking for forgiveness over permission. And there are times, undoubtedly, when steps 6 and 7 make perfect sense: emergencies, time, no access. But in that particular case, we're not really doing a good job of keeping management in the loop on things, so everyone is talking and understanding what's going on. Chuck, I saw you went off mute.
I was just going to say, probably 80% of in my view, and again, Chuck's view, not even David's probably, but in Chuck's view, 80 to 90% of everybody's work is going to be at 6 and 7. Because if your company didn't have people making decisions and doing things, you'd come to a screeching halt. But it's learning what that 10 or 20% of decisions
Mm,
that you want to make and I'm not sure, or I know my boss might want to weigh in or whatever, that I intend to becomes a really powerful tool.
mm, love it.
Mm-hmm.
Good. Let me see how we're doing on time. All right, I'm going to move forward. Thank you, Chuck. Appreciate the ad there. Casey, did you have something? Okay. All right. Um, any questions, comments? Did I miss anything in the chat, Casey, that's important for?
I think one of the key things from my side, at least from over here, is the idea of 80, 90%.
Yeah,
Is it 6 or 7?
yeah, I think that's a great ad. Yeah, good. So hey, if we've got on our call today, if we have a CEO who is also chairman of the board and owns 95% of the stock in the company, you're not going to be in this next mentee. But what I'd love to do is understand, because I think in life we all have a boss, right? We've all got a manager or a supervisor, somebody who we might report to. So I'd love to know where you are on the ladder. So we've got one last mentee for you to take a shot at. So I'd love to know where you're at, and feel free to just drop it in. I know that wasn't Chuck. So Chuck, while these results are coming in, what advice would you give to somebody who's at tell me what to do if they're not in the formal leadership position?
So I always tell people that no matter what, you can use the steps of the ladder of leadership when you're asking your boss. You can get all the way up to level 4, I guess, is what I would say is you want to make sure that you're going to your boss and you're saying, "Hey, sir or ma'am, this is what I see. This is what I think. This is what I'd like to do."
Mhm.
And they have every right in the world, even at I intend to, a leader has every right in the world to say, "Hey, I don't think that's the right decision. We're going to go a different direction." That's fine. But at least going through those steps and making that explanation, sooner or later, I always tell, especially junior people, your boss is going to be busy. He's going to have stuff from his boss that his boss is going crazy. He's got too many things to do. And you're going to come in there and as soon as you say, "This is what I'd like to do," and he's going to think about it for a split second, be like, "Yep, that's good. Go ahead and do it. Uh, Talk to me tomorrow when I'm not as busy." But all of a sudden, you've become the problem solver because you had an answer. And I'm not the person that's going to say every time you go to your boss with a problem, you need to have an answer. 1,000% in my view, that is not a good thing to tell anybody to do. Because if you do that, nobody's going to come to you with a problem. The worst problem is going to be the problem that they don't have the answer to. And if they're not going to come to you because they don't have an answer and you're going to lose it, you've just lost it. But if you do this, they're never going to be mad at you for saying, "Here's my idea."
Yeah.
Like that would be dumb as a leader. They may change it, but sooner or later they're going to want you to do it. And you're going to be the problem solver then. And
Yeah.
then it'll get a little better and a little better.
Thanks, Chuck. And on the flip side, as a manager, of course, it can get tiring if we've got people that are constantly coming to us, and these are things that we want people to come to us with their intentions for that 10 to 20% of the time. I had a group I was working with last week. We were not talking about intent-based leadership. We were actually talking about problem solving. We were talking about ideas. And this one person on the team raised his hand and said, "Hey, because it was a creative problem solving workshop, and said, I've got this person who comes to me with ideas every other day, and it's driving me nuts." And we talked about the ladder of leadership to help them start self-evaluating. So I didn't mention it, but before I talked about the ladder, there was another member of this team who raised her hand and said, I started asking, I had somebody like this about a year ago, and I started asking them questions. What are you seeing? What are you thinking about? What do you think, what do you think would be the best path of action? And that person has started coming to the boss less often. And when they do come, it's with better cooked ideas as well. So it was a great coaching moment that I didn't even have to do any teaching with as well. So let's talk a little bit about competence and what are all the ways that we could build competence. And I'll just make that a rhetorical question for to make sure we stay on time here. But there's training, there's degrees, there's just literally experience, there's delegation. Maybe there's some side by side work where people learn. I think even David Marquet, Chuck, check me if I'm wrong, but I think at times he actually gave once a year gave a tests like written tests.
Oh, he gave tests all the time. He gave tests for everything. He loves it. To
Okay.
this day, he'll give you a test.
Oh, great. That's awesome. I'm sure the crew loved it.
Um, you get tired of it, but especially for the enlisted sailors, he would give tests and he knew he was asking questions that were ultimately going to be on their rating exams, which are
Right.
the exams they need to take to get advanced.
Hmm.
So those exams got easier for the sailors because David was religious about asking
Interesting.
questions and asking questions that he knew they were going to be asked.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So let me ask you this, and again, we can put these in the chat, or maybe we'll get some people raising their hand or just going off mute. How would you know that your crew is ready to perform a critical task, right? That if it doesn't go well, we could have a major problem. And I'm just throwing that out to the group. And I am checking chat now. Let's see. Oh, so we did have some answers there, yeah. Oh, and Patricia, yes, I believe the recording will be shared. Um, good. So, how do we make sure or we reduce the chances of things going really south? Yeah, thank you, Casey. Agreed. Yep. We can never totally be sure. Well, um, what happened on the one day on the Santa Fe, and I believe it was in Japan. Were you on the sub when the
I was
torpedo
not.
incident? You were not there yet. Okay. So
Thank goodness.
yeah, my understanding, and I'm very high level on this. I'm going to get some of the details wrong. Was that there were due to load some torpedoes. And the typical way of preparing for an operation like this was that somebody in charge would do a briefing with the idea of telling people what to do. And so they were loading the torpedoes, and an accident happened. I believe David was below deck at the time and heard a loud clank and knew that that wasn't a good sound. And I believe ran up, and luckily nobody was injured. But it was at that moment that he realized you can't just give up control like we talked about, and you've got to tune it with competence and clarity. People really need to know, otherwise, need to know what they're doing and understand the mission and the priorities. Otherwise, we can have major problems here where people could get seriously hurt or killed on a submarine, right? And in our world, I say our world, like the high tech world of like Northern Virginia, it just could be that we lose a client, lose money, or people get fired. And what David likes to say is don't brief, certify. And sort of briefing is I'm going to tell you what to do, how to do it. It's a very passive way of learning and getting people ready for a particular event, a process, or an operation. When we certify, what we're doing is saying, hey, prove to me that you can do the job. All right. And how it can work is the leader of the group asks questions. Hey, what is your job? Describe it to me. What will you be doing? And, in the case of torpedoes being loaded, right? What are we going to do if we see lightning? What are we going to do if somebody falls in the water? What are we going to do if we lose communication with the crane? Things like that. Or what are we going to do if one of the torpedoes drops? So we're reducing the chance of things going wrong, and we're protecting the team, the organization, by certifying them that they've got it done. And why it works? Because again, we're shifting the responsibility, whereas in briefing, it's the briefer who's spending a certain amount of time prepping for that meeting, and everyone else just shows up, right? And they're very passive. So we move from what we say a presentation to a dialogue. And once again, we've got that word curiosity coming back, where it's important for leaders to be asking the questions to understand what's going on. What questions or comments might you have before we move on to clarity? Yep. All right. I'm just looking through the chat right now, making sure I didn't miss anything good. What do you got, Casey?
Chuck, when did you realize when something was different? When you showed?
Hmm.
So I recognized it immediately. Before I was on the USS Santa Fe, I was the dispersing officer on the USS Curtis Wilbur, which was a fine guided missile destroyer out of Yokosuka, Japan. But I always call it leadership by volume. So whoever had the biggest boomy voice got listened to the most. And before I was in the Navy, I, believe it or not, I was a roadie in a rock band. And so I had a nice big loud voice because I had to be heard in loud places. And so I got listened to a lot, but didn't mean I had the right answer. But on the Santa Fe, immediately you knew it was a little different because everybody had a voice, everybody had um an ability to speak up and even to stop
Mhm.
an evolution and say, hey, wait a second. And uh I knew it was different. And it, it it lowered my blood pressure. I mean, just by not having to live that way.
That's awesome. Thank you, Chuck. And Casey, great question. Ethan, what do you got for us?
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious here in the s- the simpler the task, the less I want to say, and the more I want to just show somebody, right? Like give them an example to follow so that they can like, if I want them to certify, right? Usually it's like a see one, do one, teach one. Like show somebody, then let them do it, and then ask them to teach somebody else. And I'm just curious, like in many of the active learning approaches and sort of like pedagogy, andragogy, um, I'm not seeing enough people shift out of the like tell people what to do. That like it just I'm curious if you have thoughts or suggestions about just like getting people out of their own way who are in the like coach instructor role. Like I'm just going to talk a lot rather than like jump in and just show you one and then have you ask questions about like you did something really interesting right here. Tell me more about that or tell me about your thinking. And I'm just curious if you've seen people kind of adapting that practice when it comes to this kind of certification.
Chuck, I'll let you answer that one if you don't mind.
Yeah. So first, I always tell people you need to find the simplest things first. You need to find something that you know as a leader. Look, that decision is not going to end anything. It's not going to make a big deal to you. To that person, it might be a huge deal. Hey, I want to get, this $10 tool, not this $10 tool, but they're the same tool. Great. I think you're the right guy to make that decision. You know what you need it for. You know why you want to do it. Go ahead and make that decision. You need to practice those things as a leader. You need to learn how to, quite honestly, just bite your tongue at first and the more you practice it, the more you'll be able to, leaders speak last. Simon Sinek's absolutely right. Leaders, he said, leaders eat last, leaders speak last. Just learn. It's none of this is to take away your ability to make a decision and you're to be able to say, I don't think that's the right direction, but you want to hear everybody out because you don't know what they're going to say. And if you speak first, nobody's going to say anything.
Hey,
Um,
Chuck, is it also fair to Ethan to get a little more specific with your question, maybe a little more tactical, is to say try asking more questions as opposed to telling. So, hey, tell me about that $10 tool. What do you like about it so much? Right? What could go right with this $10 tool? What do you think might go wrong? Is that an approach that you would be okay with?
yeah, just the phrase, tell me more about that. I
Got it.
love that phrase
Hmm.
for a lot of reasons, but that's a good way to just encourage it. Well, I mean, I always say so control, competence, clarity, kind of the theme for tonight. This ladder of leadership, oops,
Hmm.
is going to help you figure out where is this person's competence? Where is their clarity? As a leader, I can fix both of those. I can get people more training. It's my job to give you clarity. I'm the one that's supposed to tell you what are we trying to do and where are we trying to get to. Those are all things that are my job as the leader. And if you're using this ladder of leadership, if you're allowing people to say, hey, I intend to do X, Y, Z, I think things are going to work out better. Ethan, you're still looking really skeptical, buddy. I want to,
Yeah. No, I mean I think what I'm looking for is the X-ray, right? The skeletal structure of how do I show somebody a journey that someone else has been on that doesn't just tell them, okay, this is the path that you will then walk, right? It's like I want to show you these various moves. I don't, right? It's like I want to give them the ability to interrogate where they're at, not because ladder of leadership kind of makes me feel like I should be at the top all the time instead of like, no, man, like 30%, tell me what to do is total, right? Like depends on my role and like mature, right? So just, I don't know. I, I'm yearning for, right? How do I show somebody a story that helps them internalize like when is the right time to be in which mode because they can hear the story. But right, my fear in often in showing somebody one version is that they then infer that like that's the right answer. People are so interested in clarity and in concreteness that like one concrete example becomes the golden calf or the whatever, right? It's the idol to pray to. And so I'm just like, I'm looking for moves that help people identify these tactics in their lived experience, right? They'll like show them one, right? Because even like the meta narrative here is like, you're still just telling me a lot of stuff, not giving me the opportunity to experience it and so this like, I'm sort of caught in that trap of like, this is really helpful information. How do I experience it?
And
Those are
I
the kind
think,
of things that I'm looking for.
yeah, dude, Brian, I saw Brian had his hand up.
I
Thank
was
you,
gonna,
Ethan. Great
I was,
question. Do
I
you
was
want to
gonna
jump
nerd
in?
out for a second and see if I could take a crack at Ethan's question. And Doug and Chuck, tell me if I'm way off base with this. But when you had the last poll, Doug, I somewhat flippantly said that I was in a tell me what to do phase because like we're in a tell me what to do right now. Like this is a training scenario, and Doug is imparting knowledge in us. I mean, let's say that, for example, that Doug was a CPR instructor. Okay. The last thing that I would want Doug to do would be to say, if I say, what is the right number of chest compressions to give, he'd be like, well, Brian, you tell me, what do you think is the right number of chest compressions, right? So I wouldn't think of the ladder of leadership as a valuative model with the idea of that everybody should be at level 7 at all times. I think depending on where the learner is in the situation, that dictates where they are. I think of this, and again, just to nerd out for a second, to me, this sounds very similar to Hersey Blanchard's situational leadership, where the metaphor there, and Ethan, just because you said you were saying, how does this show up? Well, at level 1 of that model, it is I do it and you observe. At level 2, we're doing it together. So you could think of that as a right seat ride, pair programming, us doing a tandem. At level 3, you're doing it and I'm watching you, right? You've got about 80% of the knowledge that you need in order to do it, and I'm just tweaking a couple of the little edges of this thing. And then finally at level 4, it's fully delegated, you're off to the races, okay? So I don't really think, and Doug, tell me if I'm wrong here, but I don't think that the ladder of leadership is a evaluative model. It's not to say that number 7 is aspirational. It depends on what's right for the learner and the teacher. Have I got that right?
Chuck?
yes, the ladder of leadership, it's like you said, it's situational and it's individual. You could be at level 7 for one thing and level 2 for another one. You could be, you know, there could be two people in the same exact job, but one person's been there for 2 years and you're there at a level 5. The other person's only been there for 6 months. They're at a level 2. So it's very situational. It's very individual. Casey, you're muted, buddy.
Thanks.
Yeah.
It's like the ladder of influence in inference in some ways. How do we, I think what the ladder does better than anything else I've ever seen is build communication into teams and groups. This way you get a chance, people get to see what they're saying. It's almost like you're going from facts to opinions to beliefs to action. I've seen this. This is what I'm thinking. This is what I think we should do. I'm going to do this. I think it's one of the things that's really powerful because you're giving a means for teams to communicate that they normally don't have. I think it's one of the powerful things it brings.
All right.
And Ethan,
And
are you
Bill-
talking more about kind of people that you're wanting to invite up the ladder, or are you talking about the leaders? When is it appropriate for me to invite somebody up the ladder? Or is it both?
I mean, I'm thinking sort of there are three skills that I often teach people. I'll be right there, love. It's dinner time here. Sorry.
Good.
Right? This like the trap that I fall into here is I tell people I spend 10 minutes explaining the activity, and then I let people go do the thing that they need to practice. And the first question that most people ask is like, okay, so what are we doing? Because like until they are asked to start doing, like they're not listening, I don't know. So it's just this like I'm trying to better, right? I'm trying to better my own practice when it comes to what's the right cognitive load to say, prove or Lego piece together what the elements of this job are, and like give people more accountability over their own learning, right? This like leader versus follower, right? Shifting people out of the I know how to do this, so just listen to me, and into like a competency building, a mastery mindset of like, well, it's just going to take practice. I mean, I tell people like, if you're learning to ride a bike and you crash, it's not the bike's fault. It's a skill issue. And so like all learning requires some element of development that like you're gonna scrape your knee occasionally. And so right the conversation of how do you train in an environment where there are high stakes, it becomes kind of I'm not living in that environment very often, and so I'm kind of interested how people are approaching it. Uh, really appreciate the discussion. I feel like we're totally down a rabbit hole. Right? This is like
That's
my intellectual, thing at this point. So happy to hopefully slide back into your content, and apologies for the digression.
No worries. It's a good question. And if you have it, someone else probably does as well, Ethan. Thank you. So we'll get to the third pillar of the third C, where we talk about this concept of clarifying, right? So how well does the team really understand the mission, the purpose, the priorities, and what can we do to achieve clarity? Well, there's just a couple of quick tips again to kind of wrap things up. I'll tell you a quick story. I was working at Nextel, the old walkie-talkie communications organization from years ago. And the Nextel marketed the SVP of marketing started to get feedback through surveys and focus groups and all other information, just word of mouth, that his organization was just absolutely overwhelmed with requests from outside the organization. And he one night got together with an admin, and for 80 or so people that were in marketing, they created these laminated little cards that had the top 10 priorities for marketing and had them waiting at everybody's seat that Monday morning when they came in, and a nice email accompanied it that said, hey, if someone asks you to do something that's not on, relevant to what's on this card, you have my permission to say it's not a priority for us right now. Check back in a certain amount of time. Something David Marquet would sometimes ask people, which I think is a really neat way to get people to think more objectively, to create some distance in their own thinking, is simply asking them, what do you think I'm thinking right now? So when someone's coming to you to solve a problem, make a decision, move forward on something, just ask them, what do you think I'm thinking, right? You're trying to get people outside of their own viewpoint so that they can think more objectively about it. And then one of the other things that David suggests that I think is pretty neat is, let's just say you've got a staff meeting on Monday mornings. You might want to start off with just asking people, how clear are you on your priorities this week? And by the way, I love the idea of asking things on a 1 to 10 basis. Not, are you clear? That's just going to give you a yes or no. And most people are just going to say yes. When someone says, I'm a 3, right? Okay, I know I've got a problem here. If someone says I'm a 9, I might say, hey, what's keeping you from being a 10? Okay. I love the scaling questions because I think they invite a deeper conversation and more critical thinking and more objectivity to your conversation. So Ethan needs to get to dinner. So we're going to start wrapping things up. Um, don't forget, leader is the mindset you walk in with, which I think really propels you into being able to do this. Don't forget that people really thrive when they've got autonomy, competence, and relatedness, and don't ever, um, the more that you take decision making and authority away from people, we're definitely cutting into that. And then just don't forget the 3 C's: control, competence, clarity. And we're giving control, we're building that competence, and we're communicating often and early and clearly for clarity to make sure people know what to do, how to do it, so that they can come to us with their intentions and walk up that ladder. I'd like to thank all of you, especially Brian, Chuck, Casey, and my man Ethan, and everyone else who's been on the call, asking questions, throwing things in the chat. There's my contact information. Please do not hesitate to reach out to either me or Chuck, by the way. And you can find Chuck at ibli.com, and your email, Chuck, is it Chuck Dunphy or Chuck at?
Chuck.dunphy@ibli.com.
Awesome. Cool. Thank you so much, everybody, and happy holidays and happy leading, happy intent-based leadership.